Amelia had been a widow for 313 days. She counted them not in grief, for grief was a luxury that had been spent in the first week, but in measures of flour and lengths of thread. 313 days of darning the same thin socks, of stretching a side of bacon past all reasonable limits, of watching her daughter, Lily, grow another inch taller while her own dresses grew another inch looser. The letter from the attorney in Redemption, a town she'd only heard of in passing, had taken 6 days to reach her by post rider. It was brief. It informed her of her father's passing, a man she hadn't seen in a decade, and of an inheritance. The word hung in the small, close air of her rented room, smelling of dust and false hope. Her father had not been a man of means. He had been a man of distances, of long silences and abrupt departures. The inheritance, she suspected, would be a bill. Still, she went. She paid a farmer $2, a quarter of all the money she had in the world, to take her and Lily the 2 days by wagon to the town of Redemption. Lily, who was 7 and saw the world as a series of wonders, thought it a grand adventure. She sat on the buckboard seat, her small hand clutching a wooden bird her own father had carved, her eyes wide at the unending roll of the prairie. Amelia saw only the dust, the miles of nothing that could swallow a person whole, the same nothing her father had chased his entire life. Redemption was a single dusty street pinched between a low set of hills and a dry creek bed. The attorney's office was a small, clean room that smelled of paper and dry ink. Mr. Davies was a man whose edges had been worn smooth by time and other people's troubles. He had kind, tired eyes. "Mrs. Barrett," he said, not with pity, but with a simple statement of fact. "Your father, Henry, he was a quiet man." Amelia nodded. It was the kindest thing that had ever been said of him. "He didn't leave much," Mr. Davies continued, confirming her deepest, most practical fears. He slid a folded paper across the polished surface of his desk. It was a deed. He owned a small homestead, about 5 miles out of town. The title is clear. He paid the taxes on it every year, right on time. With this he pushed a small, soft leather pouch toward her. It made a meager clinking sound. Inside were for silver dollars. That was all that was in his effects. The deed, and this. Amelia stared at the deed, then at the $4. An abandoned plot of land and enough money to feed them for a week, if she was careful. It was exactly the sort of inheritance her father would leave, a burden disguised as a gift. Lily, who had been silently tracing the patterns in the wood floor with her shoe, looked up. "Did Grandpa leave us a house?" Mr. Davies met the child's gaze. "He did, little one. He left you a house." Amelia felt a cold knot in her stomach. A house she couldn't afford to fix, on land she couldn't farm, miles from a town where she knew no one. It wasn't a house. It was a grave for her last hope. She picked up the pouch of coins, the weight of them a mockery. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. "Your father, he only said one thing when he filed this deed with me years ago. He said, 'She'll know what to do with it.'" Amelia looked at the man, expecting to see a sign that he was in on the joke, but his face was perfectly earnest. She took the deed, folded it, and placed it next to the coins in her worn handbag. Outside, the sun was a hammer. The inheritance was not a bill. It was worse. It was a final, pointless task. The journey out to the homestead took the better part of the morning. Amelia had spent one of the silver dollars on supplies at the general store, flour, salt, beans, and a small slab of bacon. She spent another on renting a swayback mule and a rickety cart from the livery, a purchase that felt like setting fire to money. Lily sat beside her, humming a tune, pointing out lizards and hawks. For her, the world was still new. For Amelia, it was just a series of obstacles to be overcome before the final one. The directions Mr. Davies had drawn on the back of a receipt were simple enough. Follow the creek bed until you see a stand of 3 cottonwoods, then head north toward the low mesa. The track was barely there, 2 faint lines in the tall, dry grass. The cart wheels groaned in protest. The sun beat down, turning the air to a shimmering haze. Distance here was different. It wasn't measured in miles, but in hours of sweat and dust. They saw the house before they saw the details. A dark shape against the pale sky, small and square and utterly alone. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into a one-room cabin built of rough-hewn timber, chinked with mud that had long since crumbled away in places. A stone chimney stood stubbornly at one end, and the roof, made of sod and timber, had sagged in the middle like a tired old man's back. A porch ran the length of the front, one of its support posts rotted through, giving it a drunken tilt. There was no barn, no corral, just the cabin and a well with a broken bucket lying beside it. It was not a homestead. It was a monument to failure. "Is that it?" Lily's voice was small. The humming had stopped. "That's it," Amelia said, her voice flat. She pulled the mule to a halt and sat for a long moment, the reins slack in her hands. The silence was absolute, broken only by the buzz of a fly and the sigh of the wind through the grass. This was her father's legacy. Not malice, not cruelty, just a profound and staggering neglect. He hadn't left her a problem to solve, he had left her a thing that was already finished, already lost. She could turn the cart around, go back to redemption, and try to sell the deed for a pittance to someone who wanted the land for grazing. It would be the sensible thing to do. It would buy them a week. Maybe 2. She climbed down from the cart, her bones aching. She walked to the front of the cabin, her boots sinking slightly into the soft, dusty ground. She reached out and pressed her palm flat against the timber wall. The wood was sun-baked and rough, but it was solid. It was real. Underneath the decay, there was structure. There was something that had once been built with purpose. Lily came and stood beside her, her small hand finding Amelia's. "It's very quiet, Mama." "Yes," Amelia said, her gaze fixed on the sagging roofline. "It is." She pulled the large, iron key from her pocket. It was heavy and cold. She walked up the tilting steps, fitted the key into the lock, and turned. The mechanism inside groaned, then clicked. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, opening into a single, dark room filled with the smell of dust and time and abandonment. She had $2 silver left, a half-bag of flour, and a daughter to feed. She had a house that was barely standing. It was not enough. It would have to be. She stepped across the threshold, into the gloom. The first week was about water and light. The well, once cleared of debris and a mummified snake, yielded water that was cool and clear, with only a faint taste of iron. It took Amelia a full day of hauling buckets, her back and shoulders screaming, to flush it clean. At night, they had a single oil lantern, its glow pushing back the immense darkness of the prairie, creating a small, wavering circle of civilization in a room that had not known it for years. The cabin was a single space, larger than her rented room but infinitely more daunting. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with old ashes and soot. A crude table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. In one corner, a bed frame of rough wood was laced with frayed rope, its straw-filled mattress leaking from a dozen tiers. Against the far wall, a set of shelves held a few tin plates, a bent fork, and a family of mice who had long since claimed ownership. Amelia started by sweeping. She used a broom fashioned from a willow branch and tough prairie grass, and she swept out years of dust, mouse droppings, and the fine, red sand that the wind had driven through the gaps in the walls. The dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the gloom, a silent ballet of decay. Lily, with the boundless and often inconvenient energy of a 7-year-old, declared her job to be a chief of finding things. She found a bird's nest in the rafters, a single, scuffed boot under the bed, and a small, smooth stone shaped like a heart, which she presented to Amelia as a treasure of great importance. Amelia accepted it with the gravity it deserved and placed it on the mantelpiece, the cabin's first and only decoration. The work was relentless and physical. Amelia mixed mud and grass to re-chink the walls, her hands raw and caked with dirt. She patched the sagging roof with fresh-cut sod, a task that left her muscles trembling with exhaustion. She scrubbed the floorboards with sand and water until the pale grain of the wood began to show through the grime. She was not fixing the house, she was in a quiet, desperate negotiation with it. Each repair was a plea for it to hold together for one more season, one more year. Through it all, she thought of her father. Had he lived here? Had he sat at this table, staring into this fireplace? The cabin offered no clues. It was as empty of his presence as her life had been. There were no letters, no clothes, no tools. Just the bare, essential structure, as if the man himself had been scrubbed away along with the dirt. One afternoon, as Lily napped on the newly stuffed mattress, a profound weariness settled over Amelia. She sat at the table, her hands resting on the rough wood, and looked at the place. It was clean, now. The sunlight fell in clean, sharp lines across the floor. The air smelled of wood smoke from their cooking fire and the faint scent of the herbs she'd gathered to hang from the rafters. It was still a poor, broken-down cabin in the middle of nowhere, but it was their space. The work had made it theirs. She ran a hand over her face, feeling the grit of the day's labor. She was tired in her bones, but it was a different kind of tired from the hopeless fatigue of the city. This was the weariness of creation, not defeat. She got up and went to the fireplace, laying a hand on the cool stone of the chimney. She had made a fire here every night, but she had never truly looked at the construction. The stones were well set, fitted with a skill that the rest of the cabin lacked. It was the anchor, the heart of the place. Her fingers traced the lines of mortar, feeling the solid, dependable weight of it. Weeks turned into a month, and the rhythm of survival took hold. The days were long, filled with the endless tasks of frontier life. Amelia learned to shoot the old rifle she had bought with part of her dwindling funds, bringing home rabbits for their stew. Lily learned the names of the prairie flowers and how to find wild onions along the creek bed. The cabin, once a symbol of despair, was slowly becoming a home. It was a fragile piece, one that Amelia knew could be shattered by a bad storm, a dry well, or the onset of winter. The first hard rain of the season came in late autumn. It was a deluge, a solid sheet of grey water that turned the world outside to a muddy blur. Amelia and Lily sat inside, listening to the drumming on the roof, a sound that was both comforting and terrifying. Amelia watched the walls, her heart in her throat, praying her patchwork would hold. For the most part, it did. But then she saw it. A dark stain spreading on the plaster of the interior wall, next to the great stone fireplace. A trickle of water, brown with mud from the chinking, snaked its way down toward the floor. Her heart sank. A leak near the chimney meant a potential flaw in the roofline, a difficult and dangerous repair. After the rain stopped and the sun came out, steaming the moisture from the land, Amelia went to inspect the damage. The plaster was soft and bubbled. She pressed a finger against it, and a section crumbled away, falling to the hearth with a soft thud. Behind it was not timber and mud, but more plaster, old and discolored. Something was wrong. She ran her hand over the surface of the wall, from the mantelpiece down to the floorboards. Most of it was rough, uneven. But in one section, about 3 feet square and centered a foot above the floor, the wall felt different. It was perfectly flat, unnaturally smooth beneath the crumbling outer layer. She tapped it. It wasn't the dull thud of stone or the hollow sound of a wall cavity. It was a solid, metallic clunk. A cold thrill, part fear and part excitement, shot through her. She fetched the small hammer she used for driving nails. Tapping gently at first, then with more force, she chipped away at the plaster. It came off in chunks, revealing a dark, rusted surface beneath. Not a patch. Not a repair. It was a door. A small, square, iron door, set flush into the stonework of the chimney's foundation. A safe. It had no visible hinges, no handle, only a small, circular dial in the center, its numbers worn and barely legible. It was old, and it had been sealed in the wall with purpose and care. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. Her father? It didn't seem like his way. He was a man of leaving things behind, not hiding them. She knelt on the hearth, her fingers tracing the cold iron. She tried to turn the dial, but it was frozen with rust and time. She pushed at the door, pulled at it, but it was immovable, a solid block of iron mocking her. Lily, awakened by the sound of the hammering, came to stand beside her. "What is it, Mama?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Amelia breathed, her eyes fixed on the dial. I think it's a box hidden in the heart of the house, a secret kept for who knew how long. A fresh wave of questions washed over her, more potent than the despair she had felt upon her arrival. This was not neglect. This was something else entirely. She had no way to open it, no tools strong enough, no knowledge of its combination. The safe was as much a prisoner of the house as she was. But for the first time since she had arrived, she felt a flicker of something that was not just survival. It was a sharp, clear, and dangerous thing, curiosity. The safe became an obsession. It sat in the wall, a dark, silent question mark in the center of their lives. Amelia would find herself staring at it while she stirred the stew, her mind turning over the impossible lock. Lily gave it a name, the Iron Turtle, for it was hard-shelled and refused to show its head. She would leave it small offerings, her heart-shaped stone, a colorful feather, a piece of hard candy saved from their trip to town. The safe, of course, remained unmoved. Amelia tried everything she could think of. She pried at the edges with a cook knife until the tip snapped. She dripped precious lantern oil into the dial's mechanism, hoping to loosen the rust. She even tried to guess at combinations, birthdays, significant dates, simple patterns, but the dial would not yield. The frustration was a physical thing, a knot in her stomach that tightened with each passing day. She knew she could not open it alone. The thought of leaving the homestead, of spending their last silver dollar on a fool's errand, was terrifying. But the alternative, living with this silent, iron secret forever, was worse. After a week of wrestling with the decision, she made up her mind. She packed a small satchel with bread and a canteen of water, saddled the mule, and told Lily she was going to town. "Will you ask the turtle's secret?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with the gravity of the mission. Amelia managed a small smile. "I'm going to find someone who can." The ride to redemption felt different this time. The first journey had been one of grim obligation, the second one of desperate necessity. This one was driven by a fragile, new-forged purpose. The dust and the distance were the same, but her perception of them had changed. She was no longer just a victim of her circumstances, she was an agent in her own story, however small. In town, she bypassed the general store and the attorney's office. A safe like that, old and stubborn, was not a job for a man of paper. It was a job for a man of iron. The blacksmith's forge was at the far end of the street, a squat building of stone and timber, its open front glowing with the heart of a fire. The air around it smelled of coal smoke and hot metal. The rhythmic clang of a hammer on an anvil was the town's heartbeat. The blacksmith, a man named Thomas, was broad-shouldered and quiet, his face perpetually smudged with soot. He listened to her explanation without interruption, his eyes, pale in his dark face, studying her as she spoke. She didn't mention a hidden safe or a mysterious inheritance. She spoke plainly. "I have a lockbox at my place. It's old. Rusted shut. I need it opened." He wiped his hands on a leather apron, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked at her hands, saw the calluses and the dirt under the nails. He saw the worn fabric of her dress and the determined set of her jaw. He did not ask what was in the box or why it was so important. The frontier had taught him that a person's reasons were their own. "What kind of box?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Iron," she said. "Set in a stone wall." He nodded slowly. "That's a locksmith's work. Or a safecracker's." "I'm neither." Amelia's heart fell. "Can you not break it?" He considered this for a long moment, stroking his short, dark beard. "Breaking is easy. Opening is harder. Breaking can damage what's inside. You want it opened, it wasn't a question." He looked out past her, toward the empty prairie that stretched beyond the town. 5 miles out, you said?" "Near the Cartonwoods." He knew the place. Of course he knew the place. In a town this small, everyone knew everything, and they knew to pretend they didn't. "I'll come out tomorrow. At sunup." "What do I owe you?" she asked, her hand instinctively moving to the small coin purse that held her final dollar. He shook his head. We'll see if I can open it first. No sense paying for a job that can't be done. He turned back to his forge, picking up his hammer. The conversation was over. Amelia stood there for a moment, stunned by the simple, unasked-for grace. She had come to town expecting to spend her last coin. Instead, she had found something far rarer, a stranger's help, offered without condition. Thomas arrived as the sun was clearing the horizon, the sky streaked with pink and orange. He came not on a horse, but in a small, sturdy cart pulled by a mule that looked as solid and dependable as he was. The back of the cart was filled with an assortment of tools that looked more like instruments of torture than of delicate work: long-nosed chisels, heavy hammers, pry bars of varying lengths, and a strange, drill-like device with a hand crank. He gave Lily a brief, shy smile and Amelia a nod, then went straight to the fireplace. He knelt before the safe, running a calloused hand over its rusted face, much as Amelia had done. He spent a long time just looking, his head tilted, listening to a silence only he could hear. "It's a good one," he said, more to himself than to her. "A tanner's patent. From back east. They don't make them like this anymore." He selected a small hammer and a fine-tipped chisel from his roll of tools. He began to tap gently around the edge of the dial, the small, sharp tick, tick, tick of the metal echoing in the quiet room. Lily watched, mesmerized, from the perceived safety of the bed. Amelia stood by the table, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She felt like an intruder in her own home. The fate of her future was being decided by a stranger, with tools she did not understand, on a box she had only just discovered. The tension was a physical presence, thicker than the dust motes in the air. Thomas worked with a quiet, focused intensity. He did not rush. He would tap for a while, then stop and listen, placing his ear against the cold iron. He used a file to scrape away the rust on the dial, revealing the faint markings of the numbers. He tried turning it, his thick fingers surprisingly deft, but it remained frozen. He switched tactics, using a larger chisel and a heavier hammer to strike at the seams where the door met the frame. The sound was loud and jarring, a violent assault on the safe's long silence. Each blow vibrated through the floorboards, a shockwave of hope and fear. This went on for what felt like an eternity. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Amelia made coffee, and he drank it standing, his eyes never leaving the safe. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, he set down his hammer. He had managed to create a small gap, a hairline fracture of space along the top edge of the door. He inserted the tip of a thin, flexible pry bar into the opening. He leaned on it, his muscles bunching under his shirt. There was a groan of protesting metal, a terrible, screeching sound that set Amelia's teeth on edge. Then, with a sudden, deafening crack, something inside gave way. The pry bar sank an inch deeper. Thomas grunted with the effort, putting his whole body into it. The iron door, which had resisted for decades, swung open with a final, shuddering groan, revealing the darkness within. He stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. He looked at Amelia. "It's open." He began to gather his tools, his movements methodical, as if he were deliberately turning his back on the mystery he had just unlocked. "What's inside is your business." Amelia could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She walked to the fireplace and knelt on the hearth. The inside of the safe smelled of dry paper and old metal and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. Her hand trembled as she reached inside. Her fingers brushed against canvas, then paper, then the cold, milled edge of a coin. She pulled the contents out, one by one, and laid them on the floor in the spreading sunlight. There were canvas bags, heavy with the unmistakable weight of gold coins. There were stacks of old banknotes, their paper crisp, tied with faded ribbon. There was a velvet roll that, when undone, spilled out a collection of antique jewelry, a pearl necklace, a pair of diamond earrings, a heavy silver locket. There was a gold pocket watch, its cover engraved with intricate scrollwork. And at the very bottom, lying flat, was a single, thick envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with a wax stamp that had long since cracked. Lily crept closer. "Are we rich, Mama?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Amelia looked at the impossible treasure spread before her. She picked up a single gold coin, its weight solid and real in her palm. She didn't know if they were rich. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be the same. After Thomas had packed his tools and departed, refusing any payment beyond a cup of water and a quiet nod, Amelia sat on the floor amid the astonishing contents of the safe. Lily, after a few minutes of reverent silence, had taken the gold pocket watch and was holding it to her ear, listening for a heartbeat that wasn't there. "It's sleeping," she declared, before curling up on the bed with it, soon asleep herself. The silence that descended was profound. Amelia was alone with the treasure. She ran her fingers through a bag of gold coins, the sound a soft, metallic whisper. She held the pearl necklace to the light, its luster a cool, milky glow. It all felt unreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. This was not the kind of fortune one found, it was the kind one read about in penny dreadfuls. It did not belong in her world of mended clothes and stretched meals. Her gaze fell on the last item, the thick envelope. It felt heavier than all the gold. The paper was brittle, and the handwriting on the front was a faded brown script, elegant and controlled. It was not addressed to anyone. She broke the brittle wax seal with her thumb and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was dated June 19, 1843. Over 40 years ago. It was not from her father. The script was entirely different from his rough, barely legible scrawl. The letter began without salutation. "If you are reading this, then the world has not been kind to you, but some small measure of faith has held. My name is Franklin Rowe. I built this house with my own hands. I set these stones, and I will be buried on the hill overlooking the creek. I have no wife, no child. The gold in this safe is the sum of my life's work, dug from the cold ground of California. I returned here to my homestead to live out my days, but a sickness in my lungs says those days are few. I have no family to leave this to, and I will not have it fall into the hands of bankers or the government that would have taken this land if they could have. It belongs to the land, and to whoever is worthy of it. The problem, you see, is how to find a worthy person. I cannot. I am almost out of time. So I will engage in an act of foolish faith. I am selling this property, with this secret inside it, to the first man who shows me a flicker of something other than greed. I will sell it for a pittance, a sum so low it seems an insult. A man driven by avarice will see only the dilapidated cabin and the poor land, he will sneer and walk away. A man of desperation might take it, but his desperation will blind him. I am looking for a man who sees a worthless thing and accepts the burden of it without complaint. A man who will take a bad bargain and honor it simply because he gave his word. A young man came through today. His name is Henry. He is a wanderer, much as I was. He has nothing. I offered him this place for $10. He looked at the sagging roof and the broken well, and he did not try to bargain. He did not ask what was wrong with it. He looked me in the eye, counted out the coins from his thin purse, and said, "Thank you, he is going to try his luck further west, but he said he would keep the deed. He said maybe one day it would be worth something to someone in his family. I do not know if he is the worthy man. But he was willing to take on a worthless thing, and in this world, that is the closest to honor I have found. I do not know your connection to him. You may be his child, or the person he sold this land to in turn. It does not matter. What matters is that you are here. You did not abandon this place. You put your hands to the work. You swept the floors and patched the roof. You made it a home again, if only for a season. You showed up. That is the entire secret. The gold is just gold. It is a tool. Use it to build something, or to buy your freedom, or to give your child a life you did not have. The true inheritance is the house itself, and the knowledge that showing up is the only thing that has ever mattered. I sealed this wall the day after I met your father. I trust he did not know what he held. I trusted that he would, someday, pass it on to someone who would. Amelia read the letter a second time, then a third. The words blurred through a sudden film of tears. The first she had shed in months. It was not her father who had left her this fortune. It was a stranger, a ghost, a man who had died for decades ago. And yet, her father was at the center of it. His one, inexplicable act of decency, buying a worthless piece of land and keeping the deed, had been the key. He hadn't known. He couldn't have. He had simply accepted a bad bargain and, in his own careless way, honored it by not throwing it away. And in the end, he had left it to her. She'll know what to do with it. Mr. Davies's words came back to her. Perhaps her father had known her better than she thought. He had left her the one thing he owned that had any value, even if he never understood what that value was. He had passed on the burden, and in doing so, had passed on the blessing. She folded the letter carefully, her hands no longer shaking. The gold on the floor seemed less important now. The house, the solid timber walls around her, felt like the real treasure. It was a legacy of faith, passed from one stranger to another, and finally, to her. News in a place like Redemption traveled on the wind, and the wind had a name, Martha, the postmistress, who had seen Thomas the blacksmith ride out to the widow's homestead and return hours later, his face a mask of impenetrable discretion. That kind of discretion was, in itself, a story. Within a week, the whispers had solidified into a rumor, and the rumor had taken on the hard gleam of gold. No one knew the details, but the general shape of it was enough. The poor widow Barrett, who had inherited her father's worthless shack, had found something. Something significant. And where there was significance, there were relatives. They arrived on a Tuesday, in a rented buggy that looked far too clean for the dusty track. They were her father's brothers, her uncles, Frank and Albert. Amelia had not seen them since her own mother's funeral 15 years ago. They were merchants from a town 2 territories over, men who smelled of starch and account ledgers. They had not attended their own brother's sparse funeral, had not sent a single letter, had not inquired after the well-being of their niece or grandniece. But the rumor of gold had summoned them like a dinner bell. They stood in the yard, looking at the patched-up cabin with expressions of distaste. Frank, the elder, was a large man with a florid face. Albert was thin and nervous, constantly adjusting his collar. Amelia, Frank said, his voice attempting a warmth it could not achieve. It has been too long. Uncles, Amelia replied, her voice even. She stood on the porch, her hands resting on the rail. She did not invite them in. Lily peeked out from behind her skirts, clutching the sleeping pocket watch. We heard about Henry, Albert said, wringing his hands. A tragedy. We came as soon as we could. We were worried about you. Out here. Alone the lie was so thin it was transparent. We are managing, Amelia said. Frank's gaze swept over the cabin, the repaired chinking, the neat stack of firewood. His eyes lingered on the chimney. We also heard a rather fantastic story, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. About something you found. Something our brother, in his eccentricity, left behind. My father left me this house and $4, Amelia said plainly. The deed is in my name. Ah, yes, the deed, Frank said, smiling a smile that did not reach his eyes. But you see, that's the complication. Henry was many things, but he was not a sound businessman. Any assets he possessed, any discoveries made on property he owned, would rightly be considered part of the family estate. To be divided among the family. The word family hung in the air between them, a counterfeit coin. These were the men who had let their brother wander and die alone. These were the men who had offered no help, no comfort, no word of condolence. They were not family. They were vultures. There is no family estate, Amelia said, her voice quiet but firm. There was only my father. And now there is only me. The deed is in my name. The house is mine. What is in the house is mine. Albert looked aghast. But Amelia, that is not how these things work. There are laws. We are his next of kin, his brothers. We have a claim. It's only fair. Fair. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. Was it fair that my father died alone while his brothers tallied their accounts? Was it fair that my husband was taken and I was left with nothing but a daughter to feed? Do not speak to me of fairness, Uncle Albert. You did not show up then. You do not get to show up now. Frank's face hardened, the false bonhomie vanishing completely. This is not over, Amelia. We are not some prairie dust you can sweep away. We will see a lawyer. We will see the circuit judge. We will have what is rightfully ours. This land, this windfall, it belongs to the blood. You are only here by marriage. We are his blood. He spat the words like a curse. The distinction was clear. In their eyes, she was an outsider, a temporary caretaker of what belonged to them. They turned and climbed back into their buggy, their anger a palpable force. As they rode away, a cloud of dust billowed up, coating the prairie grass in a fine, brown film. Amelia watched them go, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. The gold had brought her security. And it had brought her a fight she did not want, but knew she had to win. The threat of legal action was not an idle one. Frank and Albert were men of commerce, and they understood the power of paper and lawyers. Within 2 weeks, a rider delivered a formal notice to Amelia. Her uncles had filed a petition with the county court, claiming an interest in the estate of their late brother, Henry, specifically citing the discovery of valuable assets on his former property. The petition requested that all assets be frozen and a hearing be set before the next circuit judge. The language was cold, legal, and designed to intimidate. It almost worked. For a full day, Amelia sat with the notice in her hand, the old despair creeping back in. The world was full of men like her uncles, men who believed their desires constituted a right. But the woman who read that letter was not the same woman who had arrived in Redemption months ago. She had hauled water and patched a roof. She had faced down the prairie's emptiness and her own. She had held 40-year-old gold in her hands and read a dead man's faith. She would not be undone by a piece of paper. The next morning, she rode back to town, the legal notice and Franklin Rowe's letter tucked safely in her bag. She went directly to the office of Mr. Davies. The attorney read the petition, his brow furrowed in concentration. He then read Franklin's letter, his expression unreadable. He laid both documents side by side on his desk. They are claiming, he said, thinking aloud, that the contents of the safe constitute a part of your father's estate, and as his brothers, they have a claim to it. But the house was mine, Amelia insisted. He gave it to me. The deed is in my name. That is the crux of it, Mr. Davies said, tapping the deed she had brought with her. The transfer of title was absolute. He sold it to you, in effect, for the consideration of the $4 he left you. When you took possession of the deed, the property and everything on it, and in it, became yours. The discovery was made after the title had transferred. It was not his asset to be divided. It was yours. He paused, looking at her over the rim of his spectacles. Their claim is based on greed, not law. But that doesn't mean a judge won't listen to it. The circuit judge, Judge Morrison, was an imposing figure who traveled a vast territory, bringing a semblance of order to a land that often had none. He held court in the Redemption Town Hall, which also served as the church and the school. The room was packed. News of the dispute had spread, and it had become a local spectacle, the City brothers against the quiet widow. Frank and Albert sat with their lawyer, looking confident. Amelia sat with Mr. Davies, her hands folded in her lap. The uncle's lawyer argued passionately about bloodlines, family obligation, and the spirit of inheritance law. He painted Henry as a simpleton, incapable of managing his own affairs, and Amelia as an opportunistic stranger. When it was Mr. Davies's turn, he did not argue. He simply presented the facts. He presented the deed, legally filed and witnessed. He presented the $4 silver as the token of exchange. He established the timeline, the inheritance, the transfer of title, and only then, the discovery. The petitioners, Mr. Davies concluded, his voice calm and steady, are asking this court to punish Mrs. Barrett for her diligence. They abandoned their brother in life, and now seek to profit from him in death. They saw a worthless cabin. Mrs. Barrett saw a home. She did the work. They filed a petition. The law protects those who act, not those who merely claim. The judge listened to it all, his face impassive. Finally, he looked at Amelia. "Mrs. Barrett, do you have anything to say?" Amelia stood. She looked not at the judge, but at her uncles. "They say it is about blood," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the silent room. "But they were not there to give him a drink of water. They were not there to mend his roof. Someone else was. A stranger. And my father, for whatever reason, passed that trust to me. I showed up. That is my claim." Judge Morrison looked at the documents, then at Frank and Albert, then back at Amelia. He picked up his gavel. "The petition is dismissed. The property and its contents belong to the title holder, Mrs. Barrett. The law is clear." He banged the gavel once. The sound was final. It was the sound of a door closing on the past, and another one opening on the future. The buggy carrying her uncles rattled out of town, leaving behind nothing but a bad taste and a cloud of dust. Amelia did not watch them go. She stood on the steps of the town hall, the afternoon sun warm on her face, and simply breathed. The weight she hadn't even fully realized she was carrying had lifted. Mr. Davies stood beside her, shuffling papers back into his satchel. "You were very eloquent, Mrs. Barrett," he said. "I only told the truth," she replied. "That is often the most eloquent thing a person can do," he said with a small smile. "What will you do now?" It was the question the entire town was asking. It was the question she had been asking herself. The gold and the money, which Mr. Davies had helped her deposit with a reputable banker in a larger city via a secured transfer, amounted to a staggering sum. $341,000, the banker's official appraisal had confirmed. A fortune beyond her wildest imaginings. She could leave this place. She could go back east, buy a fine house, put Lily in a fancy school. She could erase every trace of the hardship she had ever known. She could become a different person entirely. But as she rode the mule cart back to the homestead, with Lily sleeping peacefully on a blanket beside her, she knew she would not be doing any of those things. The landscape, which had once seemed so empty and threatening, now felt like a comfort. The silence was not an absence, it was a presence. The house, when it came into view, did not look like a monument to failure anymore. It looked like a beginning. It looked like hers. Over the next few months, changes came to the homestead, but they were quiet, deliberate changes. She paid Thomas the blacksmith a handsome sum to build a proper barn and to forge new hinges and a latch for her door. He also crafted a small, perfectly balanced hammer for her, a tool for building, not for breaking. She hired a man from town to help her dig a new, deeper well and to build a proper corral. She bought 2 sturdy horses and a good saddle. She bought a milk cow and a dozen chickens, whose cheerful clucking now filled the mornings. She did not tear down the old cabin. Instead, she added to it. Using the original structure as the heart, she commissioned the building of 2 new rooms, a proper bedroom for her and Lily, and a larger kitchen. She used the finest timber, the straightest nails. The stone fireplace remained the anchor of the home, the wall with its secret now plastered over, smooth and clean. The empty iron safe she kept, moving it to the new barn, where it now stored seed and grain. It was a reminder. Not of wealth, but of faith. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land, Amelia sat on her new porch, a cup of tea warming her hands. Lily was in the yard, trying to teach a new kitten how to chase a piece of string. The house behind her was warm and filled with the smell of baking bread. The land around her was peaceful. She had not erased her past. She had built upon it. She thought of Franklin Rowe, the man who had trusted a stranger, and her father, the man who had unknowingly carried that trust, and finally, of herself. She was the end of that chain, the inheritor of a quiet promise. The gold had given her freedom from want, but the house, the work, the act of showing up, that had given her a life. The true inheritance wasn't the money. It was the land, the quiet dignity of the work, and the daughter who was laughing in the yard. It was the simple, profound knowledge that she was home. She had known what to do with it, after all. She had lived.